Hello and welcome to the 2022 ICRRA Conference, Culture in Security, International Cultural Relations as an Enabler of Peace through Engagement. We're really delighted that you've joined us today for this session. It's been a very busy day so far, and this is the third of 5 online sessions through which we are exploring the contribution of arts, culture, education, and civil society to peace and security, thinking in particular about the role that international cultural relations programs can play in peace and security. We're delighted that our conference was selected to be an official side event of UNESCO's Mondiacult 2022 World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, which gets underway in Mexico City later this week. My name is Sarah Smith, and I work at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada, which is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chonanton nations, on lands connected to the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I'll be chairing this panel on the role of cultural relations in building peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. And before I introduce our panelists, I just want to say a few words to frame how this session fits into the overall program of the conference and its wider aims and objectives, as well as highlighting some of the key themes that I hope we can pick up on in our discussion. Before I do this, just a bit of background and context for you all. For those of you who aren't familiar with ICRRA, it stands for the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance. We are a network of academics and practitioners from around the world, convened by IFA, the Institut for Auslandsbeziehungen of Germany, and the British Council. We're drawn together by a common interest in sharing knowledge from research and practice in international cultural relations. That is, knowledge about the various engagements and interactions that occur between countries, communities, cultures, and peoples, taking place across the fields of culture, education, arts, civil society, and heritage. And of course, these engagements are ones that take place outside of formal diplomatic channels or official state structures. We're also committed to making our network truly global, one that is inclusive and representative of expertise and perspectives from around the world, including the Global South. We hope that's something you see reflected in the program for this conference. And on our website, I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that you can find more information on us and videos from our past conferences. What we're aiming to do with this year's conference is to create a better understanding of how and why culture, broadly understood, needs to be at the heart of global efforts to build more peaceful, secure, and inclusive societies, a key requirement for sustainable development. We're focusing particularly here on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, more specifically SDG 16. And we're promoting for and arguing for, in effect, a more holistic understanding of peace and security, one that acknowledges and embraces the role of culture in providing spaces for encounters, learning, social cohesion, as well as inclusive relationship building, exactly the kind of social practices that are at the heart of sustainable, peaceful group formations. And so we will ask in particular how and why international cooperation in this field can be supportive for these objectives. So this conference is about culture, and it's also about international cultural relations. That is, the programs, projects, initiatives, and encounters that bring people of different backgrounds, countries, and communities together through and around culture. We want to understand how these relationships work in practice and in different cultural and political contexts worldwide. And we're asking where and how this has the potential to foster a more holistic approach to peace and security that we think is vital. With Mondiacult in mind, we also hope to draw on these discussions to provide actionable recommendations for UNESCO and its stakeholders that can help re-energize the delivery of SDG 16 over the coming years until the end of the decade, the target date of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So that's the overarching scope of the conference. And as you'll see, we've given ourselves a very ambitious task, but we're very grateful to have everybody on board for the discussions today. On to today's session. It's my pleasure to briefly introduce our 3 distinguished panelists. The first is Dr. Hans Giessmann, who is Director Emeritus at the Berghof Foundation in Berlin and an Associate Professor at the University of Hamburg. His expert focus is on supporting dialogue and negotiation processes in Ethiopia and Afghanistan, and he provides technical trainings and process advice to political and civil society stakeholders in both countries. Previously, Dr. Giessmann has held numerous positions, including Director of Berghof Conflict Research, as COO of the Berghof Foundation, and as Deputy Director at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy in Hamburg. He's also served as co-chair and chair of the Global Agenda Council on Terrorism at the World Economic Forum. And since 2001, he has held a faculty position as professor at the Global Campus for Human Rights in Venice, Lido. He's also published widely in academic and policy-related publications. In fact, his publication count is over 400 titles, many of which have been translated widely. Our second panelist is Maura Ajak, a freelance multimedia journalist based in Juba, South Sudan. Maura received a diploma in communication and public relations from the University of Juba. And after joining the journalism industry in 2014, she has covered various aspects of climate change, including stories on invading locusts, recycling, and multi-year flooding. Her work in the field is multifaceted and includes reporting, presenting, producing, translating, as well as work in photography and videography. And she has also worked as a fixer for international news organizations, including Al Jazeera English. In May 2017, she was named a human rights defender by the South Sudanese civil society organization Community Empowerment for Progress organization. And this was for holding the country's presidential guards accountable for sexual assaults committed against women and girls. Her work has also been widely recognized through awards, including in 2020 being recognized with the Best Pitch on Peace and Governance at the Africa Women in Media Conference, and in 2021 garnering the Climate Action Awards of East Africa. The same year, she was named a Youth Earth Champion for East Africa. And our third panelist is an anonymous participant who we will refer to as Mr. Z, who brings an important perspective from Asia Justice and Rights, which is working to strengthen accountability and respect for human rights in the Asia-Pacific region. Asia Justice and Rights, which we might also refer to as AJAR, using the acronym, has been involved in projects in Myanmar since 2016, where it is conducting research on gender-based human rights violations. Asia Justice and Rights also provides training to increase the capacity of its Myanmar counterparts who work on gender issues, so they conduct research more efficiently by drawing on the experiences of world experts in the field. The program involves in-country awareness-raising workshops, advocacy, and regional events designed to bring activists and researchers together to learn from each other, to increase skills, and to develop and nurture ongoing professional networks in the region. Mr. Z is contributing with Mariana Cifuentes, who is a consultant to the British Council. And so we welcome Mariana, who will be contributing today through the Zoom chat. As you can see from these brief introductions, all of our panelists bring a rich and diverse range of expertise and experiences to our discussion today, touching on vital topics from security and climate change to gender issues. And I haven't even been able to list all of their accomplishments, so I do encourage our audience members to check out their full biographies, which are available on the conference website. Today's discussion is formatted around a set of questions, which will be followed by a more open-ended discussion period in which we're going to invite our audience members in to ask questions and pose comments. I encourage audience members to also post questions in the chat as we go along. And I want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available freely on the IFA website and YouTube channel afterwards. So after much ado, it's really a pleasure to get the conversation started. And I wanted to ask an opening question to allow everyone to position their work. In our discussion today, we're focused on the central role played by culture in achieving peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. So I wonder if each of our panelists might position their work in relation to this focus on culture and peace. Dr. Giessmann, I wonder if you could start us off today, drawing on your academic and policy work, as well as your work with stakeholders in Ethiopia and Afghanistan. How do you read yourself into this conversation?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, and dear listeners. I think that holding peace and working towards security as such is an art of culture. It is important to understand that the decision for going to peace or going to war is an intentional decision in any case. And to come to reason with an intentional decision to make peace needs an understanding of the parties to the conflict, that by maintaining peace and by collaborating constructively, they can pursue their interests much better than doing this at the cost of others. So that's a matter that is very much based on empathy, on tolerance, which can be learned. And since we discussed culture today, I was reminded also to another SDG, not only number 60, but also number 4. Number 4 is very much based on the UNESCO concept of education for all. And peace education as such is something which can help to equip people from the very young age of students to acquire the skills necessary to deal with conflict. Conflict as such, to me, is not something that can be easily resolved. It's maybe you could also say that conflicts are necessary to allow for social progress to happen. But what is not so conflicts are inevitable. But what is not inevitable is the use of force, and to learn that, I think, is a task that is very much related to culture. And there I see also an obligation, but also an opportunity for culture to contribute actively to sustainable peace.
Thank you for that. And I hope we have a chance to get into some more specific examples of your work going forward. I'd like to turn to Maura now. Maura, as a multimedia journalist, how do you see your work in relation to the idea of culture contributing to peace? I do believe you're muted.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah. From media perspective, culture and security and peace all in one basket. Media usually used to expand and educate people how to enhance staying together, and also to maintain peaceful coexistence. And it differs also based on the environment, from place to another or from country to another. And also it depends on the youth initiatives, if it's there or exists. Media role or media part in this area, it's a way of feeding the mind of the people in terms of how to look into healthy environment, and then to avoid violence or mitigating some other aspects that can harm the living of the people. Because like nowadays we have a lot of conflicts around. What's the role of media, for instance? Also, how to maintain sustainable development. What people know about sustainable development, what people know about the values of peace, for instance, and then values of staying together in one place. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to turn to our third participant, Mr. Z. or Mr. Z, as we might say in Canada, how does the work of Asia Justice and Rights allow us to think about achieving peace? And perhaps you can tell us a bit more about your work with this organization.
Thank you, Sarah. So I would like to raise about two different things. One is culture and peace. Culture can bring peace, and also culture can create conflict. The reason why I talk about this is in our country, in my country, we have the conflicts since 60 years ago because we don't respect culture, like the groups of like the culture each other. They don't respect, or we don't respect each other because we do not understand, or we did not understand about the other's culture. So the culture can bring peace if we understand each other, and also if we respect each other about the cultures of the different kinds or different ethnics, because there are many ethnic groups in our country, and then also due to the respect, we have the conflicts since 60 years ago. That's one of the reasons why I say culture can bring peace and also culture can create conflict. But now our country is in the chaos because we are facing, like we are under the military control, like military coup. We are under military junta. So junta didn't respect the culture, but they utilize it. They utilize to maintain their power. They utilize the aspects of the culture to maintain their legitimacy in the country from the different ethnic people. So for AJAR, we are working on the basic principle of human rights for all and justice for all. In our country, there was a culture. We call it a culture. The culture is allowing impunity in our country. So this is like, this has been the culture for many years, more than 50 decades. People of Burma allowed impunity. Then that became the culture. And then that became the culture to violate the human rights violations again and again. So now we are in this kind of situation. So Asia Justice and Rights work on the concept and policy of justice for all and human rights for all by educating all the people, like most of the people, or trying to reach out to the people about the important parts of justice and important part of combat against impunity, that kind of the culture. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, it's such a very important point that culture is not necessarily always for good. Culture can be entrenched and cultures can be difficult to change. And so I think that that's very important to keep in mind as we continue our discussion. Obviously, a key part of what AJAR is working, the context in which you're working. Now that we've heard just a bit about our participants' perspectives and how they read themselves into this conversation around culture and peace, I wonder if we might get down into the practice, more of the nitty-gritty. So how our participants might have more concrete examples of the work that they're doing. And so perhaps what we could do is think about particular case studies or examples that exemplify some of the potential the culture sector holds. So Dr. Giessmann, I wonder if I could turn to you. Is there any particular examples that you think point to the real potential that we can mobilize culture towards just and peaceful societies?
As I said before, culture is very much about learning, or more precisely, learning together, joint learning. If you do not learn about what others' perceptions or interests or sets of values are, then a confrontational attitude is more than likely. And I do fully agree with Mr. Zat has said before, culture can play out positively with regard to more constructive collaboration, but it can also play out negatively if there is no willingness or readiness or no opportunity to better understand what others think or aspire. So from my own experience, I have learned, for example, in Somalia, which is of course a also very complicated case with regard to peace and conflict, that when we started to talk about reconciliation, which is of course one of the key concepts of culture and peace building, the people that we talked to told us, no, we do not want to reconcile. We do not want to get back to the past. We want to understand what our different interests are. But if you think we can go just easily back to the past, then we will end in another conflict. And they said we would like to talk about conciliation rather, or instead of reconciliation. So I say that I tell you this example just to explain how difficult how important it is to dig deeper into the understanding, the cultural context, the livelihood, the interests of the people you talk to, in order to better understand what the drivers of a conflict are, what the root causes have been, and how to go about the differences that have escalated into violence. In Afghanistan, where I have worked now for almost 9 years, and you know, of course, how difficult the situation in Afghanistan currently looks like. At least one effect of a collaborative approach in the past was that there are more people now understand that governing a country by few against the interest of many does not work. And Afghanistan is suffering from a 700 years long history. It's not just the last 20 years or so, or last 40 years, if you want. It is much longer, and all the time, and now, unfortunately, even now again, there is a rule of a few against many. But there are more people now who understand that this is a vicious circle that must come to an end if sustainable peace for the new generations is to be attained. And I think that is where culture, where education, where skills training, where dialogue formats and also mediation can help to change the attitudes, the behavior, the social behavior, and the relationships that exist between different people and different communities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I think this idea of really being responsive to a cultural context and thinking through long as well as short histories on the ground that impact those constituencies is so important. And I hope later in our conversation we have a chance to talk a bit more about engaging constituencies in local contexts. But now I'd like to move on to Maura, and I wonder what kind of examples or case studies from your experience as a journalist you can think of that show the potential for culture to contribute to peace.
Okay. Like for South Sudan case, for instance, we experienced multiple conflicts in 2013, 2016, and youth took an initiative of reflecting arts as a message to the people, and then also like painting, and then also having some theater, street theater, and also doing some drama, and also carrying on a lot of activities, sports among it, and engaging people also, like the importance, for instance, of gender equality and equity, reflecting a lot of human rights aspects also in terms of those activities. For instance, there is a group called Anataban, I'm Tired. Anataban, it's in Arabic word, translated into English means I'm tired. Because of the multiple conflicts, that's how they have chosen that name of I'm tired of multiple conflicts. So what they do, they play music, and then they engage a lot of youth from different tribes, because a lot of communities, they had intercommunal conflicts also. And people start using it also as a tool of fighting the culture, because you're from community A and B. So the youth, they had to sacrifice in terms of, we have to come together and find a way forward for that, even if there is no other way from the political side, for instance. And then they had also to look at what they're able to do to save the communities and the other societies. Anataban, they did a lot of activities. They started engaging also to share experiences with some other youth from different countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and some other East Africa countries, and then also and beyond. There is Defy Hate Now. It's also an initiative. I've been working with them in 2017. They're also trying to mitigate hate speech, because people also try to fight online. It was a tough time by then, because a small post of a social media that mitigating or inciting conflict, it can cause a lot of things. Like you can just hear tomorrow this area A having a conflict with area B because of a certain post that incited that issue. So these groups tried harder. They started like a few number, and now they have grown into 100, and then beyond that. Now they are aware how to look into culture and reflect it. And there is also wrestling games taking place from community A, community B, whether in the capital Juba or in other states. Now it's becoming like a habit of healing people also, and then to make them reconcile, and then to come together and find a better way of engaging instead of sticking into trauma of the multiple conflicts. There are a lot of activities and initiatives. Also, youth, they're trying to look into the issue of climate, for instance. They're trying to plant trees into some other areas that experience also multiple conflicts. A lot of things that youth now they're trying to come up with, just to heal that wound of that culture harmed in a way or another, like it came in a positive way, and also it came in a negative way. Yeah, this is just like a summary of what's been taking place in the country. Yeah.
No, I thank you for that. It's really great to have these rich examples. And I think what you're bringing up, I mean, the idea of initiatives aimed at youth are a core constituency, very important and exciting to hear that that's happening across countries and regions. And I also think this example of the Defy Hate Now initiative really speaks to the very real impact that digital and virtual spaces have as both powerful places to convene people, but also areas in which conflict can emerge or events can emerge that do disrupt peace and security. And further, it's really also interesting to think about how wrestling games and initiatives such as sport can kind of provide a means not just for the inaction and connection of different groups, but also provide the spaces for further discussions that can lead to conciliation. So those are all very interesting and positive examples. So thank you for those. And I wanted to just draw audience members' attention to Mariana's contribution in the chat. And Mariana notes that part of their work with the British Council is about using artwork specifically to question assumptions about fixed components that make ethnic and religious identity of Myanmar people. So this is a gentle process to help people understand that it is possible to move towards an identity widening, to become more inclusive and erode toxic divisions, us versus them, amongst communities. And that's great to see this similarity coming up between Maura's examples. So artworks have been used in Myanmar to circulate via social media, promoting discussion around human rights and the importance of rule of law amongst youth and young people at a time of great distress and conflict. So thank you for that, Mariana. And I'd like to turn to Mr. Z again to see if there's any perhaps on the ground examples of initiatives that AJAR is doing that you think might serve to speak to this idea of how culture can contribute to achieving peace.
Thank you, Sarah. So first of all, what I would like to raise about is sustainable development. For our country, people of Burma, we really hope that our country were in the developing process. We were soon achieving the peace, but all those things dissolved in the water because of the coup in 2021, February. But what we realize is if we are going to discuss about sustainable development, it's really directly connected to rule of law and ensure justice in the country. Without that, we cannot achieve, or we cannot hope that we will have the sustainable development for us in the future. But all of our efforts can be destroyed because of there is no justice and there is no rule of law. And another thing is, I just mentioned that culture can bring peace and culture can create conflict. But at the same time, conflict can make people understanding about the different cultures. Because in our country, because of the coup, there are many, many youths have to flee to different areas, have to hide in the different areas, have to join with ethnic groups. And then that makes them understand more about different cultures. For example, it was really, really difficult to talk about Rohingya issue in the past before the coup. People of Burma didn't understand or didn't want to listen to how badly military oppressed the Rohingya people. But now people of Burma already understood, I believe, how military oppressed the people and how military violated all those human rights violations to the people in order to maintain their power, in order to maintain their interests. And then also, people like the youth, especially the youth, are hiding in different ethnic areas, and then they have to adapt with those different cultures. And then also the ethnic people also understand about different people who are hiding in their places. So that makes more understanding among each other. So I hope that was one of the supportive role or supportive mechanism to achieve peace in our society in the future. And then another thing is, right, the Spring Revolution in Burma, we call it, that is one of the cultural revolution as well. Because for example, in the past, people think that men are a level higher than the woman. So men didn't go across or go under the woman skirt or sarongs or longies. But in the Spring Revolution, everybody didn't care about that. They unite with the woman. And in the past, it was really, really difficult to accept the woman leadership. But in the Spring Revolution, most of the Burmese people accept that women can lead the society. So we call it that's a cultural revolution. So for AJAR, we have been educating to the people by using different kinds of texts and different kinds of activities. So that can prove that arts and culture can be related or can be linked together. Arts can make people more understanding about the culture because of the arts. Like for example, we use the artwork, the arts of the artists to make people more understanding or to make people understand easily about the human rights, about the justice, about the about the gender. So, and then also we are using, for example, we use graphic novel to educate about the transition and justice. We use multimedia like short film or animations to make people understand more about the oppress or violations in the prisons or the situations in other areas, like in ethnic areas. So also we use testimony videos to educate the people or to inform the people about how we need to focus on the reparation of those human rights, the victims of the human rights violations, and also how we can do to raise or to empower the survivors of the human rights violation in our country. So what I'm trying to say is, we can, like, arts can support the people to understand more about the different cultures for us. So AJAR is also using different arts from different countries, because we are the regional organizations, and then also make sure we include the culture in that artworks to educate the people, so that we understand, not only understand each other in the country, but also we understand about the people in the region as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's a really, it's interesting to think about how the arts can be used to kind of celebrate particular communities and cultures, but also to then share that understanding amongst more diverse constituencies. And I also think some of your comments for me raised questions about access, access to some of these digital initiatives and multimedia initiatives. So really, I can see that for many of you, the digital sphere becomes a really important conduit and access point for projects, even though, as we know from Maura's example, there are some obvious issues and questions that emerge in that digital realm. And so I'm thinking more towards some of the challenges that come up with regards to mobilizing culture towards peace and just institutions. So, of course, if we think about the UN Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 16, it's all about promoting peace, justice, and institutions. So achieving inclusive societies based on access to justice and information and strong institutions. So I wonder if our participants might comment based on their experiences on some of the challenges in their respective areas to achieving this SDG. So I wonder if these might be, there's some broad challenges and crises that everybody seems to be grappling with, conflict with the large, we can think about gender issues, but also there might be more pragmatic challenges. So very curious to hear a bit more. So perhaps we'll turn to Dr. Giessmann to see what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much for this important point. I would like to throw another term into our discussion, which is human security. The term of human security is not a new one. It is a concept that was born out of the post-Cold War discussions in the early 90s. I think first time it was mentioned in a UNDP development report in 1994. And it stated that the protection of human beings from being threatened, regardless of the origin of threats, freedom from fear and freedom from want, is more relevant or is above the security of states, which had dominated all discussions before this date. Now, first of all, I would say the concept has not materialized in the way it should have become materialized. Secondly, we are currently observing a return of the state security at the kind of utmost value for policymakers, geopolitics, just a buzzword, where there is a high risk for human security becoming thrown under the bus again. And for me, I think this is the basic challenge that we are confronted with. We all know that human security worldwide is at risk, but at the same time, there are many connotations of that, be it climate change or poverty or pandemics, etc., under development. But all of that requires both political attention and resources. And we are currently in the situation where I have the feeling that the resources that are needed to resolve all these problems are available in theory, but are not earmarked in practice. And that's why I think it's very important to promote the need for a change of attitudes and behavior of governments also. It's not just, I mean, I understand the micro level is really important. And I would add, for example, interactive theater is one of the tools that we have applied very actively and successfully. But the big challenge is to change the mindset of those who rule the countries, so that they understand that what is at stake here is the civilization and not the interest of nation state.
Yes, and I wanted just to follow up on that. So, I mean, this crisis and this idea that we have the resources, it's really a lack of will to follow through. Do you think in part that's a lack of value being accorded to culture and the role it could play, or a lack of value in a lot of resources being dictated by states and they being unwilling to kind of see more holistically? I just wonder if you might add.
I would say it's more about stakeholder interests that dominate the dominate values. So I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric about global values and global threats and global village and all these kind of fancy buzzwords. But what counts at the end of the day, politically, where the power lies, is the interest of states. And as long as there is no change in this way of thinking, I'm really concerned about the opportunities to make the world a better place for those who are more on the suffering side of with the line than those who have the resources and the power at their hand.
Absolutely, yes, and thank you for that. I'd like to turn now to Maura and ask you, again, thinking through these challenges, whether they're on a macro level or micro level, in your experience as a journalist, what kind of challenges do you think we see to implementing or fully achieving SDG 16?
Lack of basic needs, it always hinders the progress or development of the human beings. Lack of education, health, and also instability, whether economic instability or political instability, which it will hinder also access for the people from place to another. Like for instance, now we're experiencing floods for the past 3 years now. How many people or how many children now they are not stepping foot into school? How many people lacking access to health facilities? How many people now they are having like a lot of needs, but it's not there. There is also need like to empower that and also political will at the same time, and also engaging the community. Education, it comes in terms of like civil society, for instance, to come in and empower people and give them awareness about the risks and also how to be prepared for that, because now it's a global issue. Now we are sharing COVID-19, we're sharing the issue of global warming. A lot of things now it's in common for the first time. People now sharing the same case. So availability of those basic needs, it's important. It will prepare the person also to know the do's and the don'ts, and how also to maintain the healthy society or healthy family, because a lot of children now, you find them like homeless, or you can find also the health facilities, it's not like before because of COVID-19. COVID-19 like became a huge crisis to everyone. No one will say like I've benefited from COVID-19, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think the idea of raising the pandemic, though, is a interesting example of a shared global concern, or something that has impacted everybody, but really impacted many unequally, right? Really revealed a lot of inequity in terms of how it has played out globally. So I do thank you for also bringing up this idea of basic needs, the human security agenda, for sure. Now, Mr. Z, let's bring you into the conversation. From your perspective, I know you've spoken about some challenges already, but there are other challenges that you see to realizing SDG 16.
Yeah, thank you. And especially, I would like to thank Maria Ajak, right, to bring about the COVID-19. So while she was talking about this, I was thinking about the people of my country. So under the kind of global pandemic, and we faced the brutal coup. So how we face is we were not allowed to have the oxygen. So some of my friends lost their relative because they cannot have the oxygen. Even though they can buy it, they were not allowed to. Even though there were donors who are contributing oxygens, military didn't allow to have it. So what I'm trying to say is the challenge is lack of interest to achieve sustainable development. The lack of interest of the authority, lack of interest of the stakeholders, as Mr. Giessmann said, lack of interest of the key stakeholders, we used to say key stakeholders, and then lack of political will of the key stakeholders as well. So if, according to my experiences, even though civil society try to build sustainable peace or trying to work on achieving comprehensive or the genuine peace, we always face the obstacle by the authority, because they have the lack of political, because they only interest about their properties or their power. We were under the shadow of the works, the national reconciliation. So due to that, we couldn't complete the vision of achieving justice for people in Burma. Because in the past, people were talking about kinds of politicians and kinds of key stakeholders were talking about justice for the country. But under the name of national reconciliation, we couldn't work on achieving real peace and real justice for the country. That was the real challenge. So that's why we are working on ensuring how to guarantee justice for the people of Burma in the future, how to guarantee transitional justice for the people of Burma in the future. So we are working on many ways that we can, like raising awareness to the public, raising awareness to the people of Burma, and also informing to the world what really happening and what we need to do in the future and what we need to prepare now, aiming to the future. And also we are doing advocating to the key stakeholders, informing them that our people needs that. Our people needs this, not according to your political will or not according to your interests. Because of that lack of interest and lack of political will to aim for real peace, genuine peace and genuine justice, or genuine sustainable, genuine peace and justice, they cannot aim for the development, or they cannot work on sustainable development, because those kind of interests, those kinds of political will make the vision or the aim of our people down. So what I would like to say is, yes, I'm really totally agree with Mr. Giessmann and Maria Ajak that lack of political will, lack of interest is really, really challenging for maintaining sustainable development for the country. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's such an important point. It's a very important for international cultural relations initiatives not to simply target groups that have the political will or interest. And I see, Dr. Giessmann, you have your finger up. Would you like to jump in and respond? Yeah.
Just one point. I'm not sure. I mean, of course, there is a lack of interest. That's maybe true, but I think more important is the priorities are different. It's not necessarily the lack of interest, because more people than in the past understand that somehow satisfying the needs of people in countries in Asia and Africa is needed for stability, right? But then stability is the priority interest. It's not the destiny of the people in those countries, right? So, but there is, and I want to give some credit to Maura and to her profession. Media has, of course, much more coverage than in the past. So this region cannot be hidden from elsewhere. And since in the declaratory politics, it is understood and also confirmed or conceded that human security is a challenge that is a joint task for all parts of the world. There's a lack of critical self-reflections about the needs and achievements. I will give you one example to underline what I want to say. There is a mantra now in Western discussions about girls' schooling in Afghanistan in 20 years and what was achieved in 20 years there. This is highlighted as one of the very few success stories of Afghanistan. But if you look into the nuts and bolts, if you look into the details, you can see that the literacy rate amongst girls and women in Afghanistan after 20 years of massive international support is 17%, 17, across the country. So there is a huge difference between the urban elites, the well-trained and those where attention was given to, and the country, the rural areas of the country where the majority of the people live. And there are many other examples worldwide where you have similar situations. You have this country, this divide, a sharp divide between urban areas and rural areas. And if that is not understood, that human security requires attention that goes beyond the young urban elites, then this will create new circles of conflict wherever these differences exist. Just I wanted just to add to what Mr. Zettel said, but yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for that. And a very important point, just first acknowledging Maura's work as a journalist in the field more broadly, but also, yes, that these programs play out unequally in different areas, especially urban areas receive more attention versus rural, and that's something worth paying attention to. And I think, thank you for your comments. And I think Mr. Z started us off thinking more about stakeholders. And one of the questions I had wanted to ask the group pertains to the need to engage new stakeholders if we want to prioritize the cultural sector. I mean, it seems clear that through the participants, the initiatives that you've all talked about, many diverse communities are brought together and engaged productively. But if we want to prioritize the cultural sector and demonstrate the value of international cultural relations, are there other specific constituencies we should be paying attention to? Or should we be thinking about new communities or new coalitions as a means to realize SDG 16? So I wonder if I might put that out to the group. If anybody would like to respond, please, Mr. Z, you can feel free to unmute and just jump in, or Dr. Giessmann or Maura. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I can start. There is this intergenerational gap which it's like becoming like a threat to different generation. And there is a huge conflict into that, like who will take next and who will lead and who will look into this. And sometimes also sharing ideas, sharing projects, or sharing some solutions for the SDGs, for instance. The other thing is youth usually, now they're adapting that, like caring from the old generation, also implementing it to the next generation. So we need to look into that. Regarding communities, is still the same youth, because every few months or every year we have like the number of the people like upgrading, right? So we need to look into the new generation coming, how we can influence them to normalize transparency, to normalize accountability, to normalize like respecting other rights, and also to look into the basic needs, how it can help in near future in case of any disaster that might erupt. Yeah, this is what, yeah, that's what I'm seeing. And also looking into the stakeholders and the other groups. We need also to look into how to avail opportunities for the youth based on the environment, because the education rate, it might not be equal as every other country. For instance, availing grants based on the relevant requirements. For instance, whether someone who knows how to read, but they might not know how to do the project, but they know how to bring more youth in or more people in. Maybe someone doesn't know how to read, but they know how to implement a certain project. Yeah, we need to make it more, I don't know how to put it, but it's like a cocktail of opportunities where you cannot fit there, but you can fit here. And by the time we'll find solution on how to pass the legacy from generation to another, then it will help us also to move from country to another easily, knowing the objectives, knowing how to live in a healthy society. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a great point about multiple access points for initiatives, so that people kind of moving towards the same aims through different types of projects. And Dr. Giessmann, would you like to comment?
I would like to emphasize the need also to talk more to the old stakeholders, not just to the new ones. Because if we talk about moving from war to peace, this may mean for rebels or for governments a deep cultural shift from inherited approaches to a new alternative approach based on collaboration, dialogue, cooperation. And I have made the experience in a number of cases where I have worked with actors of violence, both state and non-state, that those people among them who were ready to learn about peace, about alternative approaches, made themselves extremely vulnerable, not vis-a-vis their opponents, but vis-a-vis their own communities. They were heavily criticized for betraying the values of a community if they said there's a need to create a dialogue with the enemy in order to find a different pattern of dealing with one another. And so my point here is, if we talk about culture, then of course it applies to everyone, perpetrators, victims, policymakers, youth, women. It is nothing that is confined to a particular group. It is really a task and a challenge that has to be taken into account for all people. But the point that I wanted to make is that even those who seem to be on the hard side, the dialogue skeptical actors, the learning skeptical actors, may have a reason to be or to act like they do. And very often it is because they do not see the alternative. They do not see the other way. And there is where I think culture, teaching of values, joint learning, learning respect and empathy can make a difference, but it's a long way to go. It's nothing that can be negotiated. It's nothing that can be imposed. It is a process which is also hard and sometimes also disappointing for those who try to support those actors. I can speak about my own experiences there, but there is no other way. If we want to have sustainable peace, it must be a peace that is wanted by all parties to a conflict.
Yes, I thank you for that. I mean, it's clearly not a linear process, not a guaranteed process, but one that is important to partake of nonetheless. And I'd like to turn now to Mr. Z and ask you your thoughts on this question of communities and who we should be paying attention to and coalitions that should be fostered.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's really important to include all parties to bring sustainable peace or to bring genuine peace. But at the same time, like from my point of view or from my experience, we need to acknowledge about the youth, because in the Spring Revolution especially, the youth are leading, and also the youth are those continue resisting the junta with every of their efforts, even though they knows that they will get arrested, they will get tortured to death, they will be killed, their family might be in danger, but they are still resisting by using every effort. And then also, they are also participating deeply in the political movement. So today we were talking about the movement with my friends. So what we realized is in 1988, we tried to open the closed door. The people of Burma tried to open the closed door in 1988. But in 2021, the door already opened. The junta trying to close the door. But the youth, they are the one that who already have the connection with the wall. They know what is right and what is wrong, and they know what the courage means. They know how to act bravely. So after the coup, they actively involved, and then they didn't need to be, how to say, like they didn't need to be shared, or they didn't need to be taught. They use their own experiences. They use their own learning how to engage with those kind of oppression. And then, like in this political movement of the Spring Revolution, the youth are also actively involving in the policy making roles, and also the youth are also actively involving in other political roles as well, including creating the peace or creating understanding among the different ethnics in the country. But I also realized that the respect is really needed. The youth also need to respect the senior. Also, the senior also need to acknowledge and respect the youth. If we cannot create the understanding or respect between each other, the peace or the aims or the target of our people or of us will not achieve easily. That will take longer. So I have to recall that we need to include every parties to build sustainable peace and justice. And at the same time, we need to respect each other. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, clearly, respect is simply a vital part of this process. And I also thank you for your comments, which make really clear the stakes and the very real challenges that are at the core of a lot of this work. Now, I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we open things up to audience questions. But before I do that, I have one final short question for each of the panelists. I'd like to return to our larger context we're gathering here as an official side event to the forthcoming Mondia Cult Conference happening in Mexico City later this week. So for each of our participants, if you could offer one idea or recommendation to those convening at Mondia Cult, what would you want to have at the fore of those conversations that are about to take place with regards to this larger idea of realizing just, inclusive, and peaceful societies? So Dr. Giessmann, let's turn to you.
I would strongly advocate in favor of putting peace education more to the forefront. To me, the young generation, those who have to meet all the challenges of our future and who are bold enough to go out of the streets and challenge governments, be it on climate change or any other topics, these are those people who can make this world really a better place. There's no reason to wait for peace education until they are grown up. So it can be really started early enough. And since it is already an enshrined goal of the UNESCO, I would strongly urge that the UNESCO takes this own objective seriously.
Yes, very good point. Take their own objectives seriously. Thank you for that, Dr. Giessmann. Maura, what would you want to put at the fore of the Mondia Cult Conference?
I will support his idea. I want to say also there is need to invest more in education, whether those children will have education under the tree or under the heat, whatever it is, or that environment is, but we have to make sure that we invest in education. At least it will help them to resolve the issues that we are failing to do now currently. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. Mr. Z.
Yeah, I would like to echo my colleagues like that to like the panelists, because it's really important to educate about the peace and also to that you not to wait until they get adults or not to wait until they have the time. So yeah, I echo two of my my college panelists. That's really important.
Dr. Giessmann.
Maybe to add, to make it a bit more creative, it would be possibly a good idea to encourage the conference to think about creative ways of joint learning. And not just about peace education as a theoretical concept, but really to take up the various very creative ideas that exist worldwide, to promote them as best practice globally, so that people do not necessarily start from scratch when thinking about good peace education, but that they can share the lessons learned from and the best practice from other cases and to apply them according to the needs and specificity of their respective conflict contexts.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, I'd like to open things up to our audience. Thank you all for being here, and I'm sure you have questions and comments you'd like to share with our panelists. You're welcome to indicate that you have a question in the chat, and then we will give you permission to turn on your video and unmute, or if you prefer, you can simply put a question in the chat at this time. And I know while people are thinking of their questions, I just wanted to point that we also had a comment in the chat while we were speaking, and I just wanted to draw everybody's attention. Someone who was currently working on a project in Avia in a region of northern Uganda where the Lord's Resistance Army rebels massacred over 70 internally displaced people in a camp. And a prominent artistic community in the Longo subregion of northern Uganda, known for the greatest concentration of traditional museums. And so this project that the commentator is sharing with us is a part of the AJAR project at the University of Bristol, examining how this artistic community remembers the massacre and how they are mourning their dead and coping through music and dance. So really a great example of some of the projects, and they're responding there to Dr. Giessmann's comments. So I just draw your attention to the chat. So questions, comments? Yes, Dr. Giessmann, go ahead.
There is a comment by Associate Professor Okaka Opio-Dokotum regarding the National War Victims Conference in Uganda. I just wanted to reiterate the need for dealing with the past. And of course, in some cases, it may take longer. I mean, talking about us Germans, for example, it took actually decades until sincere dealing with the past started in our country. But it must happen. There's no way to circumvent the issue of dealing with the past. My point that I made about Somalia was a bit different, and I just wanted to clarify. The comment I got here was not that they were not ready to discuss the past. What they told me was that they do not want to return simply to the situation before the conflict broke out, because that would mean that actually to return to the root causes of the conflict, but not to change them. And I think these two things must be distinguished from each other.
I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you, Dr. Giessmann. And we do have two questions that have come to us in the chat, so I'll direct everybody's attention there. But for those of you listening, the two questions. First, what would you see as concrete measures at this particular global moment to bring the concept of human security into focus again? How to approach the stakeholders of the state security paradigm as a priority? And the second question, when arguing and campaigning in the field of culture and security, do you see some intersectorial challenges in administration, funding structures, institutions, or academic fields? So two diverse questions, one about human security agenda, the other about thinking through challenges in the field of culture and security. So I throw those out to our panelists. Would anybody like to respond to either of those?
Yeah, maybe I can start about the first question. I mean, we are in a situation where not only the concepts are at stake, but also the institutions and structures that have brought these concepts about. And so it is not enough just to appeal or to ask or to encourage the United Nations, the UNDP program, etc., to strengthen or to emphasize the concept that they have decided on in the past. That is important, but it's not enough. What I see as a need is, first of all, more cooperative or joint initiatives taken by those countries that are particularly suffering from the current geopolitical shifts that we are observing. And secondly, I think it is really a matter of engagement of civil society, of using media, using all forms of communication, not only to raise awareness. I think awareness is there, but to accumulate as much as possible political pressure bottom up, to remind global policymakers of their own obligations, because that is where they are most vulnerable if they are taken by their own words, right? and to publicize that, to make public campaigns, to put public pressure, and to use all forms of media to put pressure on international institutions and governments can possibly help. We have seen how one little girl has really accepted a global movement regarding climate change. So it's possible. Mobilization is possible, but it needs civil courage and the willingness to act. So that's where I see is the biggest potential to remind governments and international policymakers of their own obligations and promises.
Maura or Mr. Z, would either of you like to comment as well on those questions?
Let me answer the second question about arguing, campaigning, and intersectional sectorial challenges in administration, funding, and so on. It's been happening a lot. Yeah, from media reports, obviously, sometimes there is misplaced or the funds not being put in place, and also misuse of funds, whether in academic sector or different institutions or within some other organizations. Such issues, we need to normalize accountability, as I've mentioned earlier, accountability and transparency, because some people, they think like you ask for a certain budget, by the time the budget is here, and then you're going to allocate that budget for something different, not for the actual work that you're supposed to do. So the more people will normalize justice and accountability and transparency, no one will misplace or misuse the funds. We need to take it as a normal thing. And then I'm sure that, like, even if you're 10 of you that trying hardly to achieve justice, you try to start with one step, maybe the other person also will be encouraged. And in terms of awareness, as Dr. said, it's there, yes, but how are we going to empower people? Like, it's important to educate yourself and then to upgrade from this level to the next level, because you don't want any other person coming from outside or from within telling you that you don't know how to do your job, or this task not being done in the way it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Z, do you have anything to add?
No, I do not have any comments.
That's okay. I know we have another question indicated in the chat. The name Tobaloba, and I believe we're going to give you permission to turn on your audio and video. So please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, basically, I'm not asking a question. I just want to really make a contribution as regards to the issue of peace and international culture and all that. I think basically, I had Mr. Z talking about respect for individual culture, basically saying we have to respect our differences. I think before we get to the topic of respect, we have to go to acknowledgement. Now, if I do not acknowledge the fact that this person is different from me, if I do not acknowledge the fact that this person has a different ideology, this person has a different culture, this is the way they eat in this country, this is the way they behave in this country, if I do not acknowledge that first, it would take extra effort for me to want to respect that culture. So if someone is saying, oh, in this country, if you see someone that is older than you, you're meant to kneel and say I to the person. Now, if I do not acknowledge the fact that this person is older than me, I wouldn't want to respect the person. So it all boils down to the point where we first acknowledge that this is the culture here, this is the truth, this is how it's done here. Do you understand? So the moment we get to that point of acknowledging these differences, then respect will definitely come naturally and subconsciously. And then there won't be infringement on rights or, oh yeah, I infringed on your culture, or I didn't do what I was supposed to, because I had first acknowledged the fact that that is how things are being done. And that's just all I want to say.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I'd just like to invite our panelists to respond. If they have any response.
I think that's a very important point. I mean, we all share with one another non-negotiable differences. So we are all people, young people, white, black. We have different religious affiliation. We have different cultural tradition, etc., etc. The big problem here is that if you do not accept, or if we do not accept or acknowledge the existence of difference and the legitimacy of these differences, then we may end up easily in a situation where these non-negotiable differences can become mobilized with one another. We have seen that, for example, in Yugoslavia, where all of a sudden neighbors and people who worked together for long became mobilized against ethnopolitical front lines. And we see that in other conflicts where all of a sudden belonging to a particular community is misused or mobilized to establish a confrontational line between different communities. So the point that Tobilova has made, I think, is really absolutely important, and not least because it bears the potential of front lines that that may not be in the need to become explained. Because if you just belong to a different community and it's a difference that is a given and not something that can be crossed, then of course you all of a sudden end in ethnopolitical wars and religious wars and cultural wars, etc. So I just wanted to support the point that Tobilova has made, and wanted to direct your attention to the problem if acknowledgement is not in place, but mobilization of collective identities against other collective identities.
Thank you for that. Now, Maura and Mr. Z, did either of you have a response, or would you like us to go on to the next question?
I can just give a highlight, even for us, like media, as a media practitioner, for instance, even covering stories going to a certain community, I must know and respect their culture also, because from place to another it differs. Sometimes they have, like for instance, I was with a colleague covering floods, and just placing, for instance, the mic, he shouldn't touch any woman, and it's within South Sudan. So I have to do that, approach the lady, talk to her, and then I have to do it. This is how, like, respecting the culture of other person, it's a priority, because you don't want to get into any issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that be very important. Go ahead, Mr. Z.
Sorry, thank you. So thank you so much, for pointing out the important things. Acknowledgement is really, really important. Yeah, I accept that. Because if we don't acknowledge, then that means we are not trying to understand. So in transitional justice point of view, the first thing we have to do is acknowledge. Acknowledgement is really, really important. We need to acknowledge what really happened. We need to acknowledge the victims. We need to acknowledge the things that happened. Then we can continue. So, like, respect each other, or like different ages. If we don't acknowledge, then that means we are not trying to understand. So yes, acknowledge is really, really important to understand each other, to respect each other, and also to make trust building. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I know we have a final question in the chat, but unfortunately, given we're at the end of our time together, I'd like to just draw everybody's attention to it. And I hope that this can be part of the ongoing discussions I know that are going on in this community. I think our panelists today have really shone a light on their very important work in very diverse sectors across the globe. And I want to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Giessmann, to Maura, Ajak, and to Mr. Z from Asia Justice and Rights. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our audience has too. And I so appreciate you making the time in a particularly busy week to share your work with us. And I'd also like to thank our audience for their engagement. I'd like to close by reminding everybody that the ICRRA Conference continues September 27th with 2 exciting online events. The first coming up is a What Works panel, so examining case studies of international cultural relations programs. And the second and final online event is a second panel discussion. So I hope you all can join us again and continue these discussions of international cultural relations and its role in peace and security. Thank you so much for being here today. Take care.